Welcome. Cybersecurity is a hot topic. It is in the press, it impacts nations, industries, and individuals. This course is going to focus on the explosion of cybersecurity requirements impacting federal government contractors and the context for those requirements, where we are now, where we're going, and what you can do to mitigate risks now and in the future. We're going to cover 6 specific topics relating to cybersecurity, our learning objectives. The first is to understand the context and status of the explosion in the number of federal government cybersecurity procurement regulations in the past few years. The second is to understand the 2016 Federal Acquisition Regulation, or FAR, rule concerning safeguarding what is called covered contractor information systems. The third is to understand the 2016 regulations covering controlled unclassified information, or CUI. The fourth is to take a deeper dive into the Department of Defense FAR supplement, or DFARS. And there's the FAR as the basic regulation and the DFARS as the supplement to the FAR, cybersecurity requirements. And the fifth is to understand cybersecurity requirements for classified contracts, something Pete's going to take us into. And 6 is to understand cybersecurity requirements that are in the works and expected to be issued. But there's likely to be much more than the current and future minimum requirements in these regulations that we're going to go over. And cybersecurity is likely more about expectations than minimum requirements. And those expectations may well be include systems that anticipate what's going to happen. And in the words of a leading light in the area of cybersecurity in infrastructure, in particular infrastructure that relates to the electric grid, an area that I practice in with respect to utilities, this leading light says that with respect to cybersecurity, we were going to be anticipating and expecting to skate to where the puck will be. And that's what we're going to talk about later as we go through not only the minimum requirements, but the anticipated requirements for the future. In the federal public sector, federal agencies are besieged by cyber attacks. You see that in the news. And they're struggling to recruit the talent they need and to retain that talent. Agencies are also under scrutiny by Congress, in part due to some very high-profile intrusions into public officials and private individuals' information.
Including a little thing involving the United States electoral system.
That little minor incident. So the press, the Congress, audit agencies are all scrutinizing how agencies are handling their data, and that has prompted an enforcement or further scrutiny on how contractors are handling the information and the contractor systems for handling that information. That is in part what the 2-part article that Cameron wrote deals with.
Some of these terms that we're going to tell you about, these new regulations, still have to be interpreted, so that creates risk. Even though the defendant prevailed in this case, had to litigate at the trial and the appellate level. So even if you have a good case from a False Claims Act standpoint, if you're not in compliance with one of these regulations, it still can be very costly to defend a case. Sometimes can cost you even hundreds of thousands, or if it's a big enough contract and a big enough claim, maybe even millions of dollars just to get to a summary judgment stage for a False Claims Act case like that.
Pete, I just wanted to point out very quickly, as I recall, the plaintiff in that case alleged that her husband and her husband's lover were able to hack into her personal health information, which was one of the grounds for the defendant having violated this particular act. And it's not often you see that soap opera angle in one of these very intense regulatory disputes. So I thought I'd just add that.
You would focus on that.
But I did focus on that.
Now, the new FAR rules.
Let's talk about the new FAR rules.
Which doesn't have soap opera in it.
Not a lot of soap opera.
There you go.
And now I want to introduce a very important government document, one that we're going to talk about a lot today. Nist, again, part of the Department of Commerce, has published Special Publication 800-171, which defines the requirements for protecting CUI basic on non-federal information systems. And Nist SP 800-171 is, quite frankly, very burdensome. It consists of over 100 pages. It contains 110 different security requirements that extend across 14 families of requirements. And the families include, for example, access control, configuration management, incident response, security assessment, and system information and integrity. It's an enormous and it's a complicated document. This slide lists some examples of the 110 security requirements, and I'm just going to focus on one of them because it's an example of the types of burdens associated with SP 800-171. And the requirement is, see if you can digest this, implement cryptographic mechanisms to prevent unauthorized disclosure of CUI during transmission unless otherwise protected by alternative physical safeguards.
And everybody understands
Everybody
that.
got
Implicitly.
that? I just wanted to step back a minute and note that cyber incidents can be very chaotic, and I have experienced this firsthand. When contractors learn of an attack, they can spend a good deal of time and money trying to deal with several very important issues and actions all at the same time. And these include finding the source of the attack, including whether it's from a foreign adversary, determining, and this is very important, when the attack occurred and how far the attacker penetrated into the contractor's information system, determining what, if any, information was exfiltrated or stolen from the system, and then, of course, trying to stop or remediate the attack. And all of this can occur while the contractor is simply trying to perform its day-to-day business operations. So again, it can be very, very chaotic and disruptive. So with that in mind, you really need to have plans in place to prepare to deal for a cyber incident. And that should include contacts at a qualified cyber forensics firm that can help you investigate and remediate the attack. And then if I can add, also helps to have contacts at a good law firm.
There you go. Proactive planning is key. How do you respond when the fire alarm rings? Cybersecurity in federal government procurement, however, is just a piece of a very larger, expanding, and changing universe. Cyber risk spans most, if not all, industries. Companies that are government contractors are, in many cases, commercial suppliers. And they face commercial cyber risks. They can't operate in a federal procurement silo. They've got to know the rules that apply to all of the industries that they're in. In the federal subspace, there's a tendency to set forth the requirements that Cameron has talked about, that Pete has talked about, and make checklists, the 110 things in the Nist. But in the cyber realm, static requirements will be circumvented like a modern-day Maginot Line.
Let me just jump in very quickly. The question about are the Nist requirements effective, again, the jury's out, but the adversaries that are seeking to attack your systems are moving at light speed and keeping ahead of all the defenses that we put up.
So we suggest you do three things. And those three things are to think holistically. Know the current requirements and risks in all of the industries you operate in. To think realistically. The risks can be mitigated but not eliminated. Meeting or even exceeding the minimum requirements that we've tried to articulate here very quickly does not insure against risk. And the risks include the entire spectrum, from contractual to reputational to civil fraud to criminal fraud, and to crimes, period, not just fraud. Cyber could be an existential threat to your company, and as such, it's not just a tech thing. All the resources of your corporation, all the resources of an agency, if you're with an agency, need to be brought to bear. And as Cameron brought up, the third thing to think about is to think proactively. You can't be reactive when an event occurs, when an incident occurs. You need to have a plan in place, and you need to periodically evaluate that plan. You need to exercise that plan. You need to find out the flaws in that plan, and you need to keep modifying it, continually improving it. And you need to improve not just your own, but your teammates, your subcontractors, and your suppliers.